Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me. And of course, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Niall Dean. I'm a consultant here at Camunda, and I'm going to be taking you through the various parts of the product and telling you a little bit about the company. So if everyone can see my slides, I'll move to the first one. So here's the agenda for this current webinar. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the company. Then I'm going to move on about the product itself and the Camunda BPM platform, which is where we'll spend most of the time, I think, with this webinar. We'll also be discussing customers and the case studies they brought for us to give you an example of real-world examples of Camunda being implemented. Of course, then we'll discuss next steps, and finally we'll take questions. And speaking of those questions, if you find yourself having a question at some point during the webinar, just type it into the web chat there, and at the end I'll hopefully get to it. Okay. So with that, let's have a quick chat about the company. So the company started as a consulting firm in 2008. It's founded by Jakob Freund and Bernd Rugger. They were both they both did a lot of BPMN consulting, and in fact wrote a well-selling book, Real Life BPMN, about the platform. During the period where they consulted, they sort of learned a lot about the software and the abilities that companies were looking for. And the guys decided to look into creating their own software product to try and fill the gaps that they saw in the market. We'll be going through exactly what those gaps were shortly. But right now, since 2014, when the software vending became a main focus, it pretty much changed into a software company. Of course, it still does consulting, as it's a big part of the business. But software, maintaining and producing the software is a huge part of how the company works so far. Then, of course, just last year, we founded an incorporated company in the US to help take advantage of some of the interest we had from US companies. And we use that whenever we're discussing possible ventures out there in North America. So I'm going to move on next to discussing the features of Camunda BPM. And if you have any questions, as I said, just type them along in the chat box. Okay, so we have this chart that we like to show to sort of explain to you guys exactly why Camunda BPMN is so important in the marketplace. These are the current options out there when it comes to BPMN processing. So just to explain the columns there quickly, no automation is where a company may not have implemented any actual processes yet and don't find it necessary. Internally developed processes are those that might be developed by the company itself once internally without the need of any other outside help. Within application is they're often processes that come wrapped within an existing application, and traditional BPM suites, which is sort of an attempt to make the application embedded process management into a sort of a drag and drop, no zero code orientated kind of program. So we'll just go into that in detail. So the first problem you might have noticed with no automation at all is that you come across the fact that you've no view over your processes. You have no idea really what's going under the hood. They're generally produced in a sort of ad hoc style, so you can't always be sure how the process will be completed. You also don't necessarily have any sort of embedding with the existing IT structure, and there's generally no sort of proper end-to-end communication from start of the process to the end. So, with internally developed processes, this is where a business will sort of realize that it's kind of important to have these sort of business process management software, but they often decide to create it in-house themselves. Again, a real problem is with transparency. You can sort of write a really good process start to finish with an internally developed system, but realistically, what happens in the code is the only truth, really. You're never going to be able to see an overview of that process. It's going to be pretty much black boxed for all intents and purposes. There's no visualization of the actual process itself. And at best, you would have to do a lot of documentation updating, which makes it kind of hard to maintain. And often it's sort of, when it does crash down a bit, it's going to be a harder thing to fix. We also kind of suggest that when you think about it, there are open source process engines out there in the same way there's databases and operating systems. It's kind of a case of why reinvent the wheel? Why develop your own process engine internally when there's a lot of really good options out there that have already solved a lot of the common problems you might have when developing them yourself? So next up we have within application processes. So with these guys here, these are kind of like off-the-shelf processes, like CRM or ERP, domain-specific applications. So these guys kind of exist and they have this process management internally, and they'll often be interested in just sort of its own scope and its own sort of relation with this process. It's never really attached to the existing IT structure. And a big problem, of course, is that once you start using it, you are totally locked in to the vendor in question. So we'll move on then to traditional BPM suites. So these are generally, as attempted to be a sort of a halfway between internally developed and off-the-shelf applications. So these can often let a user drag and drop and create process models with their own design tools, usually with some sort of proprietary software language even. And it's generally has its own sort of language that developers in-house will have to learn and be able to use these properly. So other problems are that they generally make you model absolutely everything. Like you would have to model interfaces, databases, API calls. A model can get incredibly complicated when using traditional BPM suites. And it's kind of the problem with it is that it doesn't really work as an off-the-shelf product. And also it's kind of proprietary and vendor locked in the same way that the off-the-shelf stuff is. So the benefits kind of aren't really there, aren't really what were originally intended. So, and also, of course, the creation of any model is completely restricted by the capabilities of this one suite that exists. So next, I'll just go on to Camunda ourselves. So just to explain the sort of what we've got going on for us here. So first of all, we've got this nice, open, developer-friendly software that we've been creating. It's really got developers in mind as a forefront. So it's incredibly easy to use for developers, especially Java developers. And the idea, and also really easy to understand for business people who may not necessarily want to have to look at sort of complicated code and things. We've implemented BPMN, which, if you guys don't already know, is the OMG standard for process modeling. Through that, we can create really easy to read models that can be passed quite easily because it's a standard between various different platforms. So there's no vendor lock-in, and of course, very, very important, it's open source and uses Java. There's no proprietary language required to learn. There are like 10 million Java developers out there, and it's not going to be a problem having to retrain someone in a very specific kind of software in order to get that through. So I'm just going to move on to next slide of the Buchanan cycle. So here's a sort of a standard cycle you might see when it comes to creating a business process. Starting on the far right there, you would design the process through some sort of tool. In this case, we would use a BPMN modeling tool. You would implement that design somehow to create the actual model that's executed. Then, of course, once that implementation is done, you have the full model in operation. And hopefully, you should continue to analyze those processes in order to find weaknesses and then possibly redesign. So to give you an idea of how Camunda deals with this lifecycle, I'll talk to you about this particular slide here. So starting with the bottom right, the Eclipse modeler. So we have a really nice Eclipse add-on. It's an Eclipse modeler that sits within Eclipse that you can create and load up BPMN models and be able to manipulate them and design full-scale applications through BPMN. Really, really developer-friendly, because if you guys know Eclipse, it's entirely Java-oriented. But as well, you might notice we have BPM.io I mentioned there. So this is a new modeler we're trying out. We've been developing the last little while. It's a web-based modeler, so it's a lot easier for business users and analysts to use. It doesn't have the bulkiness of the Eclipse modeler to have to deal with. I'll be demonstrating that a little later on to show you guys. Of course, you also might already have a modeler you're using. For instance, there's Signavio have a modeler, Trisotech have a modeler, and quite handily, we can convert those models into executable models in Camunda. So if you have a third-party modeler that you don't want to get rid of and you're quite happy with, we have this little blue box that says cycle. Well, we have a cycle program that can sort of synchronize models that have been created elsewhere with ours. Generally speaking, the only thing we require is that they follow the BPMN 2.0 standard, and we're ready to go then. Okay, so moving across there to the left, on the top left, we have a Cockpit, which is our operations overview that comes with the Camunda platform. This is where you can see all your processes that are deployed. You can check, in fact, you can go as far as checking variables within an instance of a process. And it's I'll be demonstrating that later on during the demo. We also, of course, have Tasklist, which, as the name may suggest, is a task list. This is for users to be able to view any tasks that have been sent to them by the process engine. They can complete those through some sort of form and pass it on, and it'll continue along the process cycle. I'll again be demonstrating that a little later on. You also see that there is a custom applications box there. Well, that's because the engine itself can be communicated with using REST or a Java API. So you can actually just write your own interface and implement absolutely everything that Cockpit and Tasklist does into your own application. And actually that is done quite often. So you can always connect to the back end in other ways if you need to. Of course, finally, there's the admin section, that blue box there, and that's, of course, for authorization and user permissions. And again, I'll be demonstrating that a little later on. Okay, so right now, I'm going to just let you know how the demo is going to go. I'm going to be starting off with design. I'm going to design a really quick model. I'm going to implement that model in Eclipse. Then I'm going to deploy it to a server and then maybe look at some of those operational tools. And I guess we can probably skip analysis for now, but you can see sort of through Cockpit how you can view operations as they run. Okay, so it's demo time. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, can everyone see my Eclipse? Okay, good stuff. So I'm going to start off by just creating a new project and in Eclipse. For those of you who don't know Eclipse, it's a really simple way of creating Java projects. And in this case, I'm going to be using Maven, which helps us in Maven helps to get all the requirements for a Camunda project without needing to actually go and find jars and attach extra bits and pieces. So we have a series of archetypes that are available. So in this case, I'm going to set up a servlet war. I'm just going to call this I'm going to call it holiday and finish. So what that's doing is it's creating a project for me. And because I'm using Maven, it's going to set up a lot of really cool stuff that otherwise I would have to sort of tinker about with to get it working. So for instance, I have a class here, a nice little process application class that uses this process application keyword, which is required. It also actually has the beginnings of a process model, and of course, if you look at the POM here, it has a. Sorry, let's click on that. It has all the dependencies that are required to set up a project. So we can start this quite easily. So in this Eclipse modeler, I'm just going to create a really simple project, a really simple little guy. So we have our endpoint and our start point. So I'm going to create a service task. I'm going to put it right there. I'm going to call that random holiday choice. Get rid of that actually, maybe. And then I'm going to, so this is a service task. It's going to produce, it's going to run a class in the background, and it's going to produce some sort of data that then this gate, this is a exclusive gateway, is going to react to. So in this case, it's going to send it to a user task, either this guy, or this guy here. This one will be, let's say this guy's going to decide whether we go for sun or snow holiday. Alrighty, so once they're finished, I'm going to close that gate and end the process. Since we're in the design part now, I might just show you guys BPMN BPMN.io. So it's available actually for anyone here. It's on it's online at BPMN.io, and it's, if I just go for an online demo there and just create, you may see it's actually a lot more geared towards user friendliness rather than developer friendliness, I guess is the way to say it. So for instance, here we'll create the same thing. Sure, why not? We'll create a service task, random. We will then create these gates, bring that up there. Again, that is a user task. Then this guy here can come over here. Those gates will join. And we'll end the project. Snow and sun. So, interestingly enough, this is all built on the same XML that the BPMN 2.0 standard that's used to create the Eclipse modeler. So, which means actually that if you wanted to, you could model the process here. Let's see, and download it, and then there's really no problem in just dragging that and putting it in here, and then opening it up. Oopsie, pardon me. There it is. And opening that in Eclipse. Then, of course, it works both ways, because you can also you can also make changes here in Eclipse. Let's say we want to change this event to message event and play with the format a bit. It's just a matter of dragging that and then dropping it back into the web modeler. So it's completely interchangeable, the two modeling tools. Nothing gets lost between the transfer. So any stuff that developers might do in the background will be kept, of course, in the XML. So for now, I'm going to delete that because we don't need it. Alrighty, and now back to this process. So we've done our design, so I'm just going to show you very quickly how you would wire this up with a user interface or a Java class or something. So in this case, we're going to add a class to this that's going to choose our holiday for us. So I'm going to quickly create a class, and it's going to be a random holiday delegate. And this is going to implement our Java delegate class. And luckily enough, I'm not going to have to code anything here for anyone who might get bored by that. So instead, I have done that beforehand. So I'm going to paste that in there. And what this is doing is basically determining randomly whether we're going to go for a sun holiday or not. What it's actually doing, if you're interested in the variables, how the variables are passed around, is it's simply putting the variables back into the context of the model so they can be taken out at any time by another process. So I'll demonstrate that by sort of showing you this variable sun is being set. So in this process, in this guy here, so what this gate will do then is check how that variable is set in order to make a decision. So in this case, I'm going to label this sun, and its condition here is going to be simply sun. So in this case, if this is written in Joule, Java Unified Expression Language, and it's going to just check the context of this process for this variable, and if it's true, it'll go that way. And let's sort out the snow holiday. And we're saying not sun, predictably enough. And we'll just... Okay, so that's generally all you would need to run the process. Obviously, we got a problem here because we don't have any user interface for these guys. So I'll just show you the options there for user interface. If you are creating a really simple prototype, you can click on a user task and you can go to the form fields and just simply add a form value. So the idea will be Spain choice. Actually, Spain isn't a great choice for, let's try Andorra. Call it Andorra. Oopsie. It'll simply be a Boolean, and that is all. So that form will show up then when we get this far in the process. For Snow Holiday, we're going to try something else. We're actually going to create a really simple embedded form. And to do that, we are going to go to main web apps forms. So in this folder here, we have some default forms, a start form, and a task form. I'm just going to create a new one. Now, what this form is actually going to do is it's going to embed itself within Camunda's task list. So so when the process gets this far, the task list will run this particular XML file. Now, we have embedded forms, so we have some extra options here to show you guys. So I happen to have my Snow Holiday XML planned. I'll just take that. So what this is doing is creating a simple text, simple text boxes. Just to show you that, it's got a name there. Its cam variable name is going to be Austria in that case. And with that, if that's selected, it will be put into the context as true if the tick box selected, or not, it'll be put into the context of the process as false. Okay, I won't go into more detail about that because it's kind of codey. To attach the things themselves, first of all, attach the class that I created, which I think I called random holiday delegate. So that's all you have to do. That class is now attached. I'm going to attach the sun holiday by typing in here, saying embedded, because it's an embedded form. By embedded, I mean embedded into the application. Now just give the address and in the choose snow holiday.html. Alrighty, so that should work. I'm going to build this project by right-clicking, run as Maven install. Super, and that should have given us a really simple wrapped up project. To deploy a Camunda project, it's absolutely simple. You just got to go to your deployment folder and drop it in there. I happen to have the process engine running right now, so it's actually already found that, and it's loaded that up. So now I can show you the sort of the organizational end of things, the task list and the cockpit. So for that, we're going to go here. This is a welcome page that will show up anytime you would start up the Camunda. And we're just going to maybe first of all go to Cockpit to check on our process. I'm going to use a demo sign-in. And there we have holiday. Okay, so here are the processes that happen to be deployed. There's a few bits and pieces here from earlier. If I click preview, I can see I have these particular processes, including the one we created earlier. So in fact, if you're wondering, this is actually BPMN IO embedded into the cockpit. So, embedded into the cockpit. So that's it's also possible to do that in your own applications, of course. We also have Tasklist, where we can actually start these applications. So I'm just going to kick off our process of holiday here. Hopefully it'll work. It's asking me if I want to put any process variables into the context. This is really handy for doing sort of proof of concepts or really early prototypes. So you can create, let's say, a variable name called name and have it as type string and call it null. I'm going to start the process now. Okie dokie. Now that, just because I put that variable into the context doesn't actually mean that it's going to do anything. So in this task list, we see we have tasks that are directly assigned to me. We have tasks that are assigned to my groups, assigned to particular groups like accounting. And we also have tasks for very particular people like John, Mary, Peter. And if we go to all tasks, we should see our choose snow holiday. And so here's the embedded form I showed you guys earlier. And here's what it looks like when it's put in there. So it's in form. You can also see what part of the diagram we're at this point. So obviously we went through here. It generated, I guess it generated false for sun holiday, and it went down this way. But don't take my word for it. We can actually go to Cockpit and just verify that. So we see now Cockpit now has one instance of holiday running. So I'm going to click on that. And there it is in all its glory. So we can actually go into that instance and take a look. And we have this variable that I put in there that's just hanging around the context. And we also, as you saw, have this sun variable set to false. So that's kind of a nice little thing there. That's good for overview. We can complete this task by selecting, well, first of all, claiming it. And then let's say we'll select Ireland as a nice place for a snow holiday. I think there is snow occasionally. I'm going to click submit. And we can then see when we go back here that we should have no tasks running for holiday because they've all finished. But if you're interested, you can click on history and you can see we have one task that's finished in our history. And if you click on it here, you can see the route it took to get to where it was. And in fact, you can check out all the variables that were set during the process. So we have sun was false, Ireland was true, Aspen was false, and Austria was also false. So that's the tasks as they went through. So yeah, I'm going to just start up another one to show you another cool feature that might occur. So we're going to go back here and sun holiday this time. So this is, as 50-50 chances would suggest, we have the sun holiday this time, and we only have the one option, the Andorra, as I showed you the field that we produced. Again, you wouldn't want to do this in production necessarily, but it's very handy if you're going to just create a prototype or something cool like that. And again, we'll check our diagram. We're up here now, and I'm just going to go to my cockpit because imagine you've decided that actually we made a terrible mistake letting your holiday be chosen randomly by a program. So Camunda has this feature now in month, and you can sort of find these, this guy here, for instance, And you can, if it went the wrong way, you can drag this and actually drop it on a different process. So in this case, despite the fact it might have gone in this particular direction, you might change your mind and decide, yeah, no, I don't really want that to happen. And you can apply the modification. There's, of course, a warning. You are playing with fire doing this, because you should probably know what you're doing if you're doing this. Click proceed. And now if we go back to our task list, we'll see that we now have snow holiday instead. I'm going to claim that and complete it. And then show in Cockpit again that we should have no more holidays. And if we see the history, we have 2 events that ended. The most recent one, you can see, went this way. It went up there. The orange indicates it was cancelled, and then returned here, and then continued. Okay. So that's Cockpit and Tasklist. We also, of course, have the admin feature, which controls users, groups, and authorization. The users and groups are combined using an association object. So you can have a user part of various groups, and it's quite handy. You can also actually embed your own authorization. We support LDAP as well, and I think most of our customers would use that when it comes to authorization. So I guess now I shall return to the slides. Let you guys know how the actual architecture works. So first of all, we have right here in the middle the engine, and that thing, of course, runs all the important stuff with BPMN and CMMN, and on top of that lies our API for our REST and Java API. So if take a look, we also have a connection to REST to the task list, which you guys saw earlier. We also have a REST communication to develop Cockpit, and as well as that REST communication to use the admin as well. The Eclipse modeler you saw there on the bottom left, that and along with a file repository connects to the engine as well to produce the executable models. And if we go to the next slide, we can start talking about those little dotted lines there. So as mentioned before, there's good communication between the Camunda engine and a custom application, because realistically, if you want to be able to develop something through and communicate through REST or Java, then you can develop whatever you like there and just use all the features available. And anything you saw today on Tasklist or Cockpit is freely available to develop yourselves or even embed into your own application. We also, you can see there, we have a runtime container. Now we have various different types of runtime containers that we can connect to. You can see there we've listed Tomcat, JBoss, Glassfish, IBM, and Oracle. Camunda runs in all of those. And really importantly, we also connect to a load of different databases. So we connect to Oracle, DB2, MS SQL, MySQL, PostgreSQL, and H2. This is really important if you want to continue using your current structures, your IT structures. We can almost always become part of that, and whatever existing databases you use. So it would generally make IT folk pretty happy that they don't have to change databases. Also, you can see the file repository can be various different kinds: local, CVN, CVS, and Git. And of course, as I mentioned before, we have third-party modelers that through Cycle can connect to a file repository that the engine can communicate with and work. Okay. So next up is a little sort of more about how we can be embedded into your existing structures. So Camunda can be totally integrated into your current stack because everything is quite detached. As I said, the REST API and everything written off it means that the Java API can be completely embedded into a custom application, as well as the engine can also be integrated into an existing database for a custom application. And of course, through the REST API, you can create any sort of user interface that you feel necessary or that you might already have in order to utilize the engine. Okay. So next up, just to give you guys an idea about how we make money on the Enterprise Edition and what the open source has to offer. First thing that's very important is that the vast majority of this is open source. There's a few features in Cockpit that are enterprise only. For instance, the history view that you had, but again, that was, as I mentioned, created through the REST API. So it's not the case where you won't have access to that information. We just happen to have quite a nice little UI there to properly see it. What generally we get a lot of customers for is through our support and our maintenance and bug fixes. So we have, of course, quite often we have 6-month releases, and the open source edition is updated every 6 months. But of course, for enterprise customers, we do allow them to raise tickets on bugs that are then very often fixed quite quickly and then released back in much smaller patch updates that are only available for enterprise customers. We also have up to 24/7 support, which is, as I mentioned, because we are a consulting company, we're quite proud of the support we offer in terms of offering best practices when creating your BPMN diagrams, or even in-depth knowledge of how to use Camunda as embedded into your existing infrastructure. We offer remote consulting, of course, and the support just goes right here to our developers in Berlin. It's pretty hands-on. There isn't a lot of people in between the guys who know the answers and yourself. So just to sort of show you how our roadmap looks. So right now we're on 7.3, which was released just last month. Was it? Yep. And we release every 6 months on the dot. We would rather not implement a feature than miss a deadline, so we will always have our release every 6 months, and we're quite happy in our in 7.4. What we're looking to implement is a decision model annotation to the stack currently. So now, what is this? This is a current OMG standard that is going to help us implement business rules properly through a really interesting new standard that's currently in beta, but it's really recently released, and we're really happy that it's going to be able to be implemented in the engine along with CMMN and BPMN to really give a much better coverage of all business cases. So that's on the roadmap for 7.4, and we're also sort of interested in, as you can see here, the fact that in DMN, these decision tables that are being described and talked about, they can be changed in real time. So we hope to have a really dynamic decision making apparatus within the engine that would allow DMN to sort of be this really cool, agile addition to what we already have. But that's not, of course, the only thing. We also have improvements to execution. We're going to be focusing strongly on BPMN.io. BPMN.io is not feature complete yet. It's got we're suggesting about 2 months away from implementing the final features. And then we're trying to get that up a much stronger and more readily available tool. So, and of course, we're so DMN and modeling are sort of our focus for 7.4 in November. Okay, next up, we're going to discuss customers and case studies, sort of real world examples of how customers are using our system. Here we actually have a real world example. It's an in-production model that's been used by a large bank for credit card acceptance. So a really important thing when you see this huge big diagram is to remember that this is not some abstract documentation. Like, as I showed you guys earlier, this is actually what is running. There's nothing that's not accurate here in terms of implementation, because the model itself is what gets executed. You can see here we have at the top left, we have the start process from a call center. We check data, check credit worthiness. There's some possible manual tasks if necessary. At the bottom, there's error handling involved down there. And of course, there's a trigger credit card issue process at the top there. And this is really cool because it's a live system that doesn't actually hide any of the complexity of the actual program, and also doesn't need to be. It won't be printed out and left somewhere until somebody decides to remodel it. It's a live sort of running process. So next, we're going to just show you some of the customers we have currently. So most of the customers are from English-speaking parts of Germany, English-speaking parts of Europe, including Germany and Austria and anywhere around DACH. But we've recently started to have a lot more traction in the US. So we have iTrade Network and Sparta Systems, and of course in all over North America, including a large Canadian institution that we can't mention, but are available for if you want to contact those for reference. Mainly our customers are coming from the banking and insurance sector, and we also have a lot of telecommunications organizations. We have we have Zalando there for all of their processing worldwide runs through Camunda, so that's millions of orders go through Zalando for purchasing. The one really cool thing that is about these customers is that I think 90% of them use Camunda for core business processes. It's not just these processes for, vacation time or stuff. This is properly their core business has been implemented through Camunda. So it's really important to them that they've got something like that they can trust in terms of development and updates. So next, I'll get a little more specific, and we'll talk about the Swiss Patent Office, which we do have a white paper on if you're interested. The link is up there at the top. So when these guys came to us, they were using a proprietary business process execution, and it had a big problem in that it wasn't aligning itself properly with the current IT structure. So they weren't able to communicate with existing IT, and they had this other business process application that was also running. So it just basically caused more problems. Also, any changes that were made to this required this proprietary company to make change, and it took a long time and cost a lot. So they decided to decide on Camunda, and partly because we have the best coverage of BPMN 2.0 among our competitors. We don't adhere to a zero code BPM myth that really doesn't work. And we are really easily implementable, really easily to implement into the existing IT landscape. So currently they have 100 automated business processes, that's single processes that they've developed. That's 150,000 process instances a month and 250 users. We got what they've left with is this really transparent, easy to monitor operation that they can view at any time. As you saw through Cockpit, it's a nice, clean way of viewing your processes. Slightly different was Allianz Indonesia. So they have about 2 million customers. They have 14,000 brokers. And they actually they were hard coding all their workflows, which meant that they really could not understand what was happening under the code. There was no overview, there was no transparency. And when they took to Camunda, they liked the roadmap that we produce. When we implement something and we have it in the roadmap, it gets done. We don't skip deadlines, and we and of course, because they're in Indonesia, they really enjoyed our consulting and support solutions. So right now they have 40 automated processes. They have 160,000 process instances per month, and they have integrated 7 legacy applications. In fact, every new application they create or new process they model is through Camunda. They use entirely Camunda for that, and they're very happy with our support apparently, and they say so. So there's also white paper available on the Camunda network to view what they attest to there. So now on to next steps. So we have, so generally speaking, we always recommend doing a proof of concept to see if your process fits with Camunda, or see how well we can deal with it. We usually spend 2 days helping you design it, learning BPMN, and helping you understand how your architects and software developers can get a hang of Camunda and using BPMN to execute these models. We also have, once we develop a process, a prototype, it usually takes about 2.5 days. We can always talk to architects about how the process works. And then finally, of course, we do a live demo to show you guys what can be achieved through these processes. So I guess that brings us up to about our Q&A, about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to try and answer some questions that might have popped up. So if you guys have any, go ahead. I'll just answer one there about multi-tenancy. As far as multi-tenancy options are concerned, now this would be for everybody else, this would be where we would have multiple instances of the same process running on different servers, or running differently. We have 3 options. It's possible to implement tenant markers with Camunda. It would require you, of course, to actually implement the variable that denotes the marker, and that would have to be implemented with every database connection. We also have a really cool schema per tenant option. So that's usually what we suggest for multi-tenancy, which would be a single database where every tenant has its own schema, and it runs off that schema through the same connection in order to separate data completely, but also maintain, don't waste database connections. Okay, hope that answers the question. Other question on the XML. the XML doesn't have any, well, it's not proprietary in the sense that we didn't come up with it, but there are some proprietary option embedded things like, well, I wouldn't call it proprietary, but they're just, for instance, our variables are put into the XML. Like, for instance, the name of the class that might get run for a service task, or the location of a form for a user task would be stored in the XML as an additional element. The BPMN 2.0 standard actually allows for those additional elements, so it's not. It wouldn't, for instance, prevent the another application from being able to load those BPMN files. Okay, anything else? Okay, I see a question there on Cockpit. Cockpit, yeah, so Cockpit can have various add-ons that so the question is about all the options in Cockpit and how they can be restricted for a user or not. Well, we actually have a really nice sort of store where you can actually choose to select additional features of Cockpit or unselect them, and then generate a downloadable deployment of Cockpit that would have, let's say, a read-only feature that you could give to somebody, or for a certain user type that could only be restricted to very certain features. Or in fact, actually, we have a really good community add-on location that people actually, they create these add-ons themselves and share them back to the community, and they're available to download and add to your deployment. These would include things like let's see, pie charts and things using history data. They have heat maps, so you can see how which paths through your model get passed most often, and various other things that people have used. So another question there is, so data can be modeled in BPMN. There is a data object. It's usually not modeled because the idea of BPMN is to model the process and the flow, not the data flow. But it's not necessarily. It's definitely possible you can create a data object, but you can't necessarily. It's not necessarily advised. It's just not the way BPMN is designed. There's sort of better options for data management, and usually we would say leave the developers behind under the hood to deal with data. And if you need to see data, for instance, in the model and see how it passes, let's say a very specific data like a form or something, then you can do that in BPMN by modeling by using a data object, it's called. Okay, so we've reached the hour mark, and I'm sorry if I couldn't get to any of your questions. The recording of this will be sent probably tomorrow morning or tonight, depending on what time it is where you are. And again, thanks so much for attending the webinar. Hope you enjoy Camunda and enjoy creating BPMN models. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.